Good morning and welcome. Buenos días, bienvenidos, bienvenidas. Bonjour, bienvenue. And thank you for joining us today. My name is Lucie Labouze and I will be your host during this webinar. I work at the SPO Regional Activity Center, which is co-hosting these events together with the International Coral Reef Initiative. We are delighted to welcome you for the launch of the Status and Trend of Caribbean Coral Reef 1970-2024 reports. Before we begin, I just want to provide a couple of logistical remarks. The presentation will be in English, but Spanish interpretation is available. So please make sure you are connected to the audio channel of your choice. And if you are experiencing any issue with interpretation, please let us know and we will be happy to assist you. Antes de comenzar, unas breves indicaciones sobre el acceso al idioma. Las presentaciones de este webinario se harán en inglés, pero hay interpretación disponible en español, así que pueden conectarse al idioma de su preferencia. Y si experimentan algún problema con la interpretación, por favor, indíquelo en el chat y lo vamos a ayudar. I also wanted to let you know that this webinar will last 90 minutes and is being recorded. You can use the chat for general communication or technical help, and you are welcome to submit questions at any moment in the question and answer box, and only there. The questions in the chat might not be seen or answered. Some of your questions will be answered during this webinar, and for the rest, we will provide answers in the summary of this webinar afterwards. So I will be presenting the work that was coordinated by my colleague Oriane Petit during her time at SPORAC. She's one of the key authors of the report, and we have with us today the other key authors of the reports, as well as several distinguished speakers whom I'll be introducing during the session. Let me briefly walk you through today's agenda. We'll be beginning with opening remarks, followed by a broad presentation of this new regional report. Then we'll dive into the main findings and explore case studies and key recommendations. We will then have insight from the Global Fund for Coral Reefs and perspective from the ICRI. Finally, we'll share information on how you can actually access the full reports. With that, let's begin. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Christopher Cobbin, our first speaker. Christopher is the coordinator of the UNEP Cartagena Convention Secretariat. He's based in Jamaica. And with over 30 years of experience in environmental governance and regional cooperation, Christopher has played a central role in advancing marine protection across the wider Caribbean, and he continues to champion Caribbean leaderships in global ocean policy and governance. So Christopher, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lucy. Buenos dias, buenas tardes. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues, partners, and friends of the Caribbean Sea. Imagine standing on a Caribbean beach, waves breaking gently over reefs that have protected our coast for centuries. These reefs are our living infrastructure, yet today they are collapsing. Many of us, the gray hair tells it all, remember when reefs that once exploded with color are now pale and silent beneath the waves. The GCRMN Status and Trends of Caribbean Coral Reefs 1970 to 2024 report provides the clearest evidence of this crisis and critically the path forward. Since 1970, the wider Caribbean has lost more than half of its live cover. In some areas, declines reach 80%. With warming seas, bleaching events are hitting harder, faster, and with far less time for recovery. We are rapidly approaching a tipping point for our reefs. What is at stake? Our coral reefs are valued at $6.2 billion annually in fisheries and tourism benefits. With adjacent coastal ecosystems, mangroves, seagrass, their value can increase to $15 billion annually. They also reduce wave energy by up to 97%, shielding our coastal communities from storm surges. And over 30 million people rely on our reefs for food, income, and safety. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not an environmental emergency. It is a crisis of economic security and livelihoods for millions. This landmark publication brings together more than 5 decades of scientific data coordinated through the outstanding leadership of our SPOR Regional Activity Center, SPORAC, working alongside the Healthy Reefs for Healthy People, the GCRMN, Caribbean Node, ICRI, UNEP, and several governments, research institutions, experts, and community partners. Their work reflects the commitment of our contracting parties to science-driven cooperation under our specially protected areas and wildlife protocol. The convention provides the legal and policy foundation that makes this collaboration possible. And through our SPOR protocol, protecting coastal and marine biodiversity is its central mandate. And today's report is a reflection of that mandate in action. These findings are also a call to accelerate implementation. They encourage our contracting parties to expand marine protected areas, to strengthen habitat management, improve water quality, and scale up nature-based solutions. These are not just abstract concepts. They are the measures that will determine whether our reefs continue to decline or begin to recover. More importantly, the report confirms that recovery is real. Even in an era of warming oceans, stronger storms, reefs can rebound when pressures are reduced, communities are engaged, and management is consistent and science-based. We see these successes across the Caribbean, and you will hear some of them during this webinar, and we can expand and replicate them. This is why cooperation matters. Coral reefs do not recognize national boundaries. Their decline or recovery depends on how effectively we coordinate across countries, across sectors, and across institutions. This is our moment in the Caribbean to lead. Our actions can contribute meaningfully to global coral reef recovery and to the Coral Reef Breakthrough Initiative, demonstrating Caribbean leadership at a time when the world urgently needs it. My sincere thanks and appreciation to our partners and donors, SPORAC, the Healthy Reefs for Healthy People, GCRM Caribbean, ICRI, UNEP, the Government of Monaco, the GEF, and UNOPS through the Gulf of Mexico Large Marine Ecosystem Project. But perhaps above all, the scientists, the coral reef managers, and the coastal communities who protect these reefs each and every day. Now I call on everyone joining the webinar, and I saw it was already over 100 people. Read the report, share it with your decision makers, and identify where your work can accelerate implementation of its recommendations. The Secretariat stands ready to work with all of you. Let this report be both a guide and a motivation. The challenges are significant, yes, but they are not insurmountable. If we act with urgency and unity, if we invest in science, and if we support the communities who depend on reefs every day, we can build the foundation for regional coral reef recovery. A healthy Caribbean Sea is still within reach. Our reefs and the millions who rely on them deserve nothing less. This report is our knowledge, our unity is our strength. Together, we will give our Caribbean reefs the future they demand. That future begins now. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Christopher. And so let's start this future by having an overview of the reports, and I'm gonna keep the floor myself to guide you through these reports. Just before we dive into it, I'd like to share a few key facts about the coral reef ecosystems in the Caribbean region. Our reefs cover more than 24,000 square kilometers and represent about 10% of the world's coral reef. As you might already know, these reefs provide vital ecosystem services, including biodiversity support, coastal protection, nutrient cycling, fisheries, livelihood, and cultural values. So we do need the reefs. The Caribbean and the Caribbean people need their reefs, and we need to know how they are doing. This is why the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network, or GCRMN, has been established in 1995. It aims to provide the best available scientific information on the status and on the trends of coral reef ecosystem for their conservation and management, and also to inform national, regional, and global policy. The GCRMN is an operational network of the International Coral Reef Initiative, and on the ground, it's a network of scientists, managers, organizations that monitor the condition of coral reefs underwater. So, how our reefs are doing in the Caribbean? The last answer we had at a regional scale to this question was provided 10 years ago with the publication of the previous regional reports, and a lot of things happened since 2014. That's why the GCRMN Caribbean wanted to publish a new report on the status and trends of the Caribbean coral reef. The process began last year and extended over a year and a half, which was actually a quite short time frame for such a huge work. And so we started by launching a call for data in the whole region in June 2024, and then organized the first workshop in Puerto Morelos in Mexico, thanks to the support of the University of Mexico, to work on data analysis. We brought together a data task force, a communication task force, a core editor team, and we worked for a year and a half on the analysis of a huge amount of data, and then on writing and reviewing the different parts of the reports. We also had a chance to present the preliminary results to the United Nations Ocean Conference in Nice in June 2025, and more recently in the last GCFI conference, which is a regional conference in Colombia in November. And here we are today, launching officially this report, and we'll keep disseminating these reports in 2026. So let's take a look of what's inside this report. It begins with acknowledgements, followed by forewords from Chris Corbin that you just heard. And then you'll have the executive summary in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and French. Then the report is mainly structured into 2 large sections. The first is a synthesis for the Caribbean region, covering coral reefs, threats, temporal trends in Baltic cover, and recommendations. The second part of the report provides synthesis for 44 countries or territories, and it also includes 9 case studies. Finally, you will also find in the report sections on material and methods, authors' contributions, bibliography, and some supplementary materials. So before moving into the report content, I just wanted to show you what the 44 chapters on countries and territory look like. They include a general overview of the country or territory and information on threats, and as well as the temporal threats in hard coral and macroalgae cover. They were developed as much as possible in collaboration with the co-author from the different places on site. So I'm sure at this stage you're eager to learn more about the results of the report, and I'm really happy to introduce to you our 2 next speakers, Dr. Laetitia Maton. She's based in Saint-Martin. She's a tropical marine ecologist, and her research combines environmental DNA, field monitoring, as well as spatial ecology to explore biodiversity patterns and support science-based conservation. Laetitia is also engaged in education and outreach to foster local involvement in marine conservation and sustainable ocean management. Then Dr. Jeremy Vika will take the floor. He is also a marine ecologist specializing in temporal dynamics, disturbances, and resilience of coral reef ecosystem. His works focus on understanding how coral reef ecosystems respond to environmental change and on threatening global monitoring to inform executive conservation and management. Jeremy has been contributing as an editor to several GCRMN reports, leading data integration and analysis, and he did exactly the same for this Caribbean report. So Laetitia and Jeremy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you all for joining this webinar. So I will briefly present the main threats and pressures to the Caribbean reefs that you can find in the first part of the report. So climate change is currently the biggest threat to Caribbean coral reef, and since 1985, the sea surface temperatures in the region have risen just over 1 degree, leading to frequent and intense marine heat waves. These heat waves, which are prolonged periods of high sea temperatures, have triggered widespread bleaching across many countries in the Caribbean. Over the same period, the Caribbean has experienced around 170 hurricanes, including major storms like Hurricane Allen in Mexico in 1980 and Hurricane Irma in the Lesser Antilles in 2017, which caused strong damage to coral reef. And unfortunately, storm intensity is expected to increase even more over the 21st century. The ocean has also absorbed roughly a third of the excess CO2 released into the atmosphere. and this drives ocean acidification, which slows coral calcification and makes it harder for reefs to grow and recover. Next slide, please. Coastal development is another major pressure on Caribbean reefs and is driven by rapid population growth and booming tourism along the coastlines. This development has led to increased nutrient runoff into the ocean, and excess nutrients reduce coral growth, increase the disease, and promote macroalgae growth. Some other pollutants, such as plastics, hydrocarbons, and pesticides, have also increased in the last decades and further degraded reef health. And in the last decades, maritime traffic also increased a lot in the Caribbean, both for international trade and cruise tourism, leading to important pressures on coral reef from port extension works, anchoring, and pollution from the vessels. Next slide, please. In recent decades, coral disease outbreaks have become more frequent and severe, causing large-scale loss of hard corals across the Caribbean. During the 1990s, several diseases, such as the yellow band disease, the white band disease, and the white plague, spread widely and strongly affected various species, mostly of massive corals. And today, the stony coral tissue loss disease, which was first detected in Florida in 2014, is affecting more than 30 coral species in at least 30 Caribbean countries, and it has extremely high mortality rates. Another major issue for Caribbean reef is the collapse of the long-spine sea urchin, the Diadema antilorum, once the region's most important herbivore. And this species has suffered mass die-offs in the 1980s and again in 2022, which drastically reduced the grazing pressure from this species and allowed algae to overgrow coral reefs. Next slide, please. Unsustainable fishing is also threatening Caribbean coral reef with overfishing of top predators such as groupers, snappers, and sharks, disrupting the food webs and weakening the reef resilience. And herbivorous fish, like the parrotfish, which are essential for maintaining low algae cover and leaving space for coral to grow, have been also increasingly targeted by small-scale fisheries, which greatly reduced the grazing pressure from this species and accelerated algal overgrowth. And key invertebrate species, including the spiny lobsters and queen conch, also faced steep declines in the recent decades due to intense fishing and harvesting, and habitat degradation, pollution, and weak regulations and enforcement. Next slide, please. And finally, invasive species are also posing an increasing threats to the coral reef. For many years now, we have the lionfish, which is native from the Pacific, and it has spread throughout the whole Caribbean, and it preys on a wide range of reef species. But the impact of this species is varies depending on the places. But more recently, some more concerns have risen from invasive species of soft corals that have been detected in Venezuela, Cuba, and Puerto Rico. And these species that you can see on the right side of the slide grow very quickly, and they outcompete native hard corals, and they appear more resistant to warming waters and nutrient pollution. So there is some research that is done to control the spread of this species that is still ongoing. And I now leave the floor to Jeremy to present the results of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Laetitia. So in addition of this qualitative synthesis about the threats to coral reef of the Caribbean, we also estimated the temporal trends in the cover of different benthic organisms, particularly hard coral cover and macroalgae cover. And to this aim, we collated 72 coral reef monitoring datasets across the region. This represents a total of 13,000 sites and 23,000 surveys conducted in coral reef of the Caribbean from 1973 to 2024. The distribution of monitoring sites is represented on this map, And as you can see, some countries and territories have been much more monitored than others. For example, it is the case of Florida and the Mesoamerican Reef. And to overcome this bias of non-homogeneous distribution of data across space and time, we estimated the trends using a statistical model. Next slide, please. So here is represented the estimated trend in hard coral cover in the Caribbean from 1970 to 2024. Before 1980, and based on previous studies, the hard coral cover was between 29% and 38%. But hard coral cover declined by 48% since 1980, and even more since 1970. So this means that hard corals now cover half of the space they covered in the early 80s. As explained by Laetitia, the majority of this decline has been driven by coral disease, like the stony coral tissue loss disease, as well as bleaching events, which were particularly important in 1998, 2005, and more recently in 2023-24. However, chronic stressors have also played a role in this decline. Next slide, please. Then we were also interested in the trends of three major hard coral genera, Acropora, Orbicella, and Porites. For Acropora, which encompass branching hard coral species, a dramatic decline occurred in the 70s due to coral disease. And then the cover remained low since then. For Orbicella, which include mostly massive species, the cover declined significantly in 1998 due to a major bleaching event, and then remained stable at around 5%, following a quick recovery. And for Porites, which are mostly weedy corals, the cover increased from 1980 to 2024. So these different patterns highlights that hard coral cover is now made up of massive species rather than historically branching hard coral species. And these results also highlight the fact that hard coral cover alone hides a much more complex story. Next slide, please. Finally, we also analyzed the trend in macroalgae cover. Before 1980, the macroalgae cover was between 4% and 13%. But macroalgae cover increased by 85% from 1980 to 2024. Several factors have been responsible for this dramatic increase. First, the herbivores have declined significantly in the region over the past decades. Sea urchins population collapsed due to a mass die-off in 1983 and 2022. And herbivorous species, mainly surgeonfish and parrotfish, have also declined due to unsustainable fishing practices. Without those grazers, macroalgae were able to grow. But in addition, the human activities through agriculture and coastal developments have increased the nutrients in coral reef, which further promoted macroalgae growth. And of course, macroalgae also benefited from the decline in hard coral cover, which leave space available for their growth. Next slide, please. So to summarize, before 1980, coral reefs of the Caribbean were characterized by a high hard coral cover and by a high proportion of branching hard corals, which created complex habitats. Also, 40 years ago, macroalgae cover was low. But today, coral reefs of the Caribbean are characterized by a low hard coral cover and by a higher proportion of massive or weedy hard corals. And in addition, today, macroalgae cover is higher than it was in the past. And this shift in Baltic Caribbean coral reef communities have important consequences for the provision of ecosystem services, such as tourism, coastal protection, or fisheries. And so this change, which happened in only a few decades, doesn't only affect the extraordinary biodiversity of coral reef, but also threaten the livelihoods of numerous people who depend on these ecosystems. Next slide, please. And I now let Lucy introduce Mary.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Laetitia. We'll now move to our question and answer session that be moderated by Dr. Melanie McField. Melanie is also one of the key authors of the report. She's the founder and director of Healthy Reefs for Healthy People, who produced the first coral reef report card almost 2 decades ago. Her research has focused on coral bleaching, marine contaminants, MPA management effectiveness, restoring herbivory, and other management intervention to improve reef health and resilience. She has been participating in the GCRMN for 30 years, and she now serves as the co-chair of the GCRMN Caribbean. Over to you, Melanie.
Thank you, Lucy. Well, I thought I was going to have the difficult task of selecting from the many questions that might have come in, but we have one question. Okay, now we're getting some questions. Come on, people. I'm sure this has stimulated, some of your ideas and things. This is your chance to talk to both Jeremy and Leticia about the report. So the first one was just a detail about sharing of the presentation. So I'm not sure exactly which website, but I think we can share this presentation on our GCRM in Caribbean location, right? Or put it beside the report. So that can be done. And we will, before the end of the webinar, we'll get you the link to that or the answer. So the next question is about will the forum be able to speak on any positive reef growth through their efforts? I would love to hear some positive news in our conservation efforts. So yes, that is something we have talked about and we tried to do in the case studies, which is going to be in the next session. You'll hear a little bit about some actual positive responses. But I mean, Jeremy, you looked at this in a number of different ways. Do you want to try to find a positive spin on all the numbers that you have crunched?
Thank you, Melanie, and thank you for this question. I think this makes a perfect transition to the next part of this presentation, actually, because we do have several positive stories to tell, because within the report, we were also interested to have more local scale information, which is not always possible to mention at the regional scale. And for this reason, we asked some key experts in the region to write several case studies. And some of these case studies are about a positive story in terms of coral reef conservation.
Yes. Okay, well, thank you. And since there's no other technical questions, I think we'll just move on to the next section. Thanks, Lucy.
Yes, sure. So please keep using the question and answer box, and we'll try to answer the question either during the webinar or during at the end while sharing the answer with the webinar link. So yes, it's time for us to move to the report case studies. This section will be presented by Dr. Andrea Rivera Sosa. She's based in Mexico. She's also a key author of the report. Andrea is the Science to Policy and Practice Manager at the Coral Reef Alliance, and she has played a central role in linking science, field implementation, and policy across the Mesoamerican Reef. Our second speaker for this part of the webinar is Dr. Aldo Crocker. He is based in Dominican Republic. He is a Marine Conservation Program Manager for the Central Caribbean for the Nature Conservancy. And Aldo has been actively involved through the entire process of this report, bringing his experience in coral reef monitoring, disease research, and restoration to the table. So, Andrea, Aldo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lucy, and it's such a pleasure to be here today. And part of the GCRMN Caribbean report, it was very important for us to show some hopeful and positive regional case studies. So several country experts wrote these stories, and you'll be able to read them fully in the report. But I will let you know some about the case studies. So the first one was in Bonaire, called A Tale of Two Islands, Lessons for Monitoring at Fixed Sites with the same researchers. The second one was in Colombia, which talks about the paradoxical Varadero Reef in the region. And as you can see, these studies are distributed throughout the Caribbean. The third one is the Dominican Republic, the value of a joint coral monitoring program to improve the outcome of coral restoration programs. And Algo Crocker will be sharing with you and with us shortly about this case study. The fourth one was in Belize. It's about protecting the Mesoamerican reef through blended finance. Then we have a study in Mexico, safeguarding unique coral ecosystems in the Gulf of Mexico. Also, another story in Panama, which talks about coral fish abundance and reef rugosity in Bocas del Toro. Also in Puerto Rico, socioeconomic trends in the US Caribbean. And the next two are in the US Virgin Islands. One talks about 40 years of research and monitoring documents the success of large marine protected areas in rebuilding red hind spawning aggregations. And the last one is the road to recovery for endangered Nassau grouper that I'll be talking a little bit more about in a moment. So now we will continue with Aldo Crocker, who will talk about the case study in the Dominican Republic. Aldo, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And thank you all for joining to this wonderful event. This case study aims at depicting the value of a coral reef monitoring program to improve the outcomes and our planning in restoration interventions. And it's the product of collaborative work that TNC has been doing with our partners. And the ICRI Coral Reef Project is just one example of many projects that Grupo Punta Cana and Fundemar and others have been conducting. So to start with this case study, let me say that we have been observing dramatic changes in coral reef in the Dominican Republic. So far, in the last 3 years, we have lost 60 to 95% of our coral cover in our reefs. We have been observing dramatic mortality of reef-building coral populations, and those are the ones that we used to use in coral restoration programs. We have identified 3 drivers, the stony coral tissue loss disease, the recent diadema die-off, and the 2023-2024 bleaching event. And during this event, we recorded severe mortality in our nurseries. We have lost a substantial amount of asexual recruits that we outplanted into our reef. And also, good news is that the sexual babies, the coral spats, are doing better. Next one, please. So if you look at this slide, to the right portion in the scheme, you can see a ring. The outer ring depicts the history of or evolution of our monitoring program. And in the inner part of that circle, you see the restoration. And both are integrated. So when I came here, monitoring program at Samar, where I work, had no spatial design, and the protocols that we used was AGRA and Reef Check. And in 2019, we started to use a nested design with region, locations, and sites with a total of 31 sites monitored regularly. Also, we incorporated a multivariate approach. And in 2005, right now with Monitorea program, we have a system that involves 5 institutions and 3 ecosystems, coral, seagrass, and mangroves. And this monitoring program is replicated 2 to 3 times a year. From the restoration effort side, we started in 2004 and 2011 with the implementation of coral nurseries. In 2019, we incorporated control, reference, and intervention designs to measure restoration success. And right now, we are very successful to reproduce corals, both sexually and asexually, and we are even using omics to improve our restoration efforts. Now, we are in the position to create a restoration model that maximizes production and effective return at lower economical and ecological loss. So the benefits of the monitoring program could be summarized in 5 points. First, we are better in setting objectives, goals, and restoration models. Second, we have tools now to select our control, intervention, and reference sites with robust experimental design, properly replicated in plots, and follow before and after interventions. The design of interventions is more assertive. We are now using sexual and asexual propagation of colonies that we know are resistant. We have reshaped and adapt restoration plan. We have optimized efforts in terms of logistics, investments, and more expected restoration outputs. And finally, we are monitoring restoration success using a multivariate approach that allows us to compare ecosystem structure and function between control, intervention, and referent treatments. With that, I would like to finish this case study.
Thank you, Aldo. And something that it's very important to highlight is that although the GCRMN Caribbean report sought to compile regional fish data, substantial challenges in comparing some of this data collection methods and integrating various data sets prevented their inclusion in the full assessment. Therefore, we emphasized selected case studies that illustrate key fisheries and management strategies. So in the case study number 9, Road to Recovery for the Endangered Nassau Grouper, researchers from the U.S. Virgin Islands shared how Nassau grouper was one of the largest grouper species in the Caribbean. But this species was exposed to large population collapses in the 1970s due to intensive fishing, particularly in fish spawning aggregation sites. In 2005, an important management strategy in the U.S. Virgin Islands implemented a 3-month seasonal closure, specifically in Gramanic Bank. And since then, the density and maximum abundance of Nassau groupers have increased, as you can see in the top and lower graphs. Yearly surveys on the Gramanic Bank fish spawning aggregation showed the abundance of Nassau groupers increase from 30 fish to over 1,000 fish in about 20 years. So this shows that populations are able to recover if we protect them during critical spawning aggregations. In the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about the Mesoamerican reef. So this is actually a section that is part of the recommendation section of the report, where we highlighted the importance of fully protected areas. So we provide here an example of the Mesoamerican reef, particularly from the 2024 report card, which includes Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras. And in these two graphs, we see a comparison of commercial and herbivorous fish biomass in the Mesoamerican reef across fully protected areas in darker blue, highly protected areas in lighter blue, general use marine protected is in gray, and areas outside MPAs in red. So what we see here is that commercial fish are indicated by grouper and snapper families, which exhibit some of the highest fishing pressure, and herbivorous fish, such as parrotfish and surgeonfish, are protected through the entire Mesoamerican reef. So variations in zoning are mainly due to enhanced enforcement. So the numbers displayed on the bars indicate the number of monitoring sites used to estimate fish biomass. And in both cases, we see an evident trend, higher biomass in areas with higher levels of protection. And although currently only about 2% of the MAR is fully protected, it is important to increase efforts to increase their protection and therefore their biomass. So with this, I close the section of the case studies and invite you to review the other positive stories in the Caribbean in the full report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Andrea,
you,
that was
Aldo.
great.
Thank you, Andrea. So yeah, we're now going to move to the recommendation section presented by Melanie McField that I introduced before. Just to let you know that we see there is lots of questions in the question and answer box. So we'll have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. So please, Melanie, the floor is yours.
Yeah. And team on the panel, help me select since I'm giving this section. I can't select from all of these questions. So we'll have time for some of them. So, okay, next slide, please. So the recommendation section of this report is actually 10 pages. So there's a lot of detail and information. It's from page 80 to 90, kind of at the end of that Caribbean synthesis before you get into the chapters and territories. But breaking them down into 5 main themes, we have to focus on urgently reducing greenhouse gas concentrations because it is evident in this that climate change and heat stress have become one of the main threat to coral reefs survival. Same time, reducing those local threats, the threats that we have detailed and talked about, and we have a number of conventions and tools for reducing these, but we just haven't implemented them fully or to the extent that we could. The next one, also marine protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures. Those are tools that have been in effect since mainly in the 80s, and we need to have more. And as Andrea's last slide just showed, we need more that are actually fully protected. So maintaining and developing monitoring programs and sharing data and being more collaborative and standardizing data, that was one of the main recommendations from the report 10 years ago, and that is still very much a recommendation of this report. Finally, the kind of the newer thing in there is talking about restoration, because we are to that point that we need more restoration at scale, and not just of corals, but of the reef ecosystem, including functions. Next slide. So in addition to the report itself that has those 10 pages of recommendations, we produced this policy brief with the assistance of Coral Reef Alliance. It's a nice, succinct 4 to 5, actually came out a little more than 5 pages, but anyway, shorter. It's much shorter and it's got nice graphics. It's available in English, Spanish, and French for downloading. So you can use this. We hope all of you will use this in your outreach to decision makers. And just to go in a little further on this, the next slide. Each of those 5 themes that I mentioned goes into, even in the policy brief, goes into greater detail. So I just took one of them, which is the marine protected areas one, which, you know, people have been working on. That's been a focus of marine conservation efforts over the years. And we've gotten, you know, this is the list of specific recommendations under that, which talks about investment and the recognition that, you know, money is needed for all of this, and looking at investing in actual management. So you have enforcement, because we see again and again, if these protected areas are just paper parks, of course, there's no ecological impact. And looking at new initiatives like that last bullet about blended finance. We have 3 of these in the Caribbean that I think Yaba will talk about. We need to get in new tools for financing to protect these areas that are identified, and go over our areas again with a lens of looking for climate resilient reefs. We need greater connectivity between ecosystems and habitats, and also looking for the areas that may be more resilient. Then thinking about networks and promoting collaboration. So looking at things like MPA Connect, the SPA Areas Managers Network, and Red Gulfo. So those types of things can help us collaborate more, and with the investment, we can do more monitoring, surveillance, and control, which will make them all more effective. Next slide. Okay, thank you. That's it for the recommendations.
Thank
So
you,
I think
Melanie.
now, are we going to do the Q&A now?
I would suggest we do it at the end of
At the very end,
webinar.
okay.
Yes. So as you can see, some questions are already being answered by our panelists, and we'll have this session at the really end of the webinar. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Yabanex Batista, who will give us some insight from the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. Yabanex is the Deputy Manager of the Global Fund for Coral Reef. With more than 20 years experience, he has focused his career on international financing institutions and sustainable financing for conservation and development, government relations, policy, and multilateral environmental agreements. Yabanex, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lucy, to all the organizers for the kind invitation to be here with you. It's particularly important for me to be here as another proud son of the Caribbean that has joined this session. And I'm here to talk to you about one of the ways in which we can hopefully implement solutions that can give even a better chance of fighting chance for coral reefs in the Caribbean, and that is financing. I think the report is key in terms of helping us bring the science that is required to take the right policy decisions. But often we all know, we all know this very much and very well in the Caribbean, financing is quite a key limiting factor. So let me just tell you very quickly first, what is the Global Fund for Coral Reefs? We are a global blended finance mechanism that is seeking to protect and conserve the most ocean reefs around the world, the communities that depend on them, and the economies that they underpin by developing what we call reef positive solutions, which we classify in two main buckets, let's say. First, reef positive businesses, which are businesses that abate coral reef drivers of degradation. And then we support the development and implementation of new financial mechanisms to continue to increase the amount of resources that are dedicated to coral reefs. In the wider Caribbean region, we have three programs. One in the Bahamas that is implemented by our main partner there is the Nature Conservancy with other local partners, including government. In the Mesoamerican Reef, we are working with Mar Fund, who is our main partner, but also working with other colleagues like actually Melanie's institution, Healthy Reefs, and others. And that program is called Mar Invest. And then in Colombia, we are working in the San Andres and Providenciales Islands with Fondo Acción, who is our main partner, but we do this also in partnership with the local government. And let me just tell you very, very quickly about three solutions that we are currently spearheading with our partners. And in the case of the Mesoamerican Reef region, one of the solutions that I think is quite fascinating is the partnership with the Royal Mayan Shrimp Farms company. Many of you would know that shrimp farming has been a key industry in Belize, but it's an industry that has struggled with debt and being able to be fully commercially viable. And at the same time, it's an industry that traditionally has produced wastewaters that affect coral reefs. Through advisory services provided by our Mar Invest program, we have been able to support debt restructuring for this firm, and in that process, be able to make the company a lot more sustainable in its operations by avoiding affluents from the shrimp pools to contaminate the nearby waters. So I'm being very, very succinct, but this is just to give you a flavor. So this is one of the key solutions that we have brought to the table. In the case of Colombia, together with other partners like the Blue Action Fund, we have been supporting the Seaflower Biosphere Reserve Fund. This is a long-term financial instrument to protect over 200,000 hectares of coral reefs within the UNESCO Seaflower Biosphere Reserve. The objective here is that our support and that of others is going to help close the financing gap for this MPA effective management and at the same time also promote the development and growth of those reef positive businesses that we are supporting throughout our overall portfolio. In this particular case, I think it's very important to highlight how this work is being done hand in hand with the Raizal people, which are the local communities in the archipelago. This has been one of the key ingredients for success in this program. In addition to that, through the Colombia program, we are also working on what we're calling an investment account. This is what Fundación calls an investment account, which has identified already 12 businesses that are going to be supported with business development grants and eventually, hopefully, access to other kinds of financing so that they can grow the businesses. And last but not least, in Bahamas, we are supporting reef positive solutions in parametric insurance, also launching a Blue Economy Accelerator together with the Small Business Development Center in the Bahamas to support over 40 reef positive businesses. To conclude, I would like to also highlight that we are also very committed in supporting science, and that's why the GFCR actually was one of the financial supporters of the Puerto Morelos workshop that was mentioned earlier support, and that was one of the ways in which this report actually has come to life. We have done the same thing for the GCRMN regional workshop report in the Western Indian Ocean, and we're also collaborating with GCRMN on the global report. So we think data is key for reef positive businesses to succeed, and this is why we are committed to also working with ICRI and GCRMN in this regard. Thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions later on.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the GFCR for their support for this report. And I'm now pleased to introduce our final speaker. Thomas Dallison is a senior project manager at Blue Pangolin Consulting, specializing in coral reef conservation, effective marine resource management, and international policy. With expertise in area-based management tools and biodiversity tool, Tom is part of the International Coral Reef Initiative Secretariat, co-hosting this webinar, and co-lead of the GCRMN Status of Coral Reef of the World's 2025 report. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lucy, and my sincere thanks to all those, of course, involved in the development and the production and funding of this critical report. And as Lucy mentioned, my name is Tom Dallison, and I'm currently working to support the current ICRI Secretariat and co-leading the GCRMN's Next Global Report. So I think we can all agree, after hearing the presentations, what stands out the most is the clarity of the story that this Caribbean assessment tells us. It's a story, unfortunately, of significant loss and accelerating pressure, but critically also one of resilience, agency, and possibility. We can't soften the severity of the trends. Caribbean coral cover has declined by around half since the 1980s, and macroalgae, as we have seen, has expanded dramatically. Diseases, marine heat waves, and the loss of herbivores are reshaping the ecosystems across the region. And these declines are not abstract. They affect food security, coastal protection, economies, and the identity of many in the region, the millions of people that rely directly on coral reefs. But I think it would be remiss to present this story as one of inevitable collapse. Coral reefs are not uniform, and they are not passive victims of change. And throughout the region, we see reefs that are holding on, recovering, and in some cases adapting in ways that exceed our expectations. The report highlights protected areas where coral cover is higher and fish biomass is stronger. And we see how restoration, when embedded in effective management, can accelerate recovery. And decades of monitoring show that when local pressures and pressures in general are reduced, reefs can respond favorably. And these examples demonstrate that resilience is real and that the future of the Caribbean reefs is still something that we can influence and is something that we cannot lose hope on. And this is where the political context becomes vital. And whilst the science has never been clearer, unfortunately, as we've seen, political prioritization for coral reefs has slipped over recent years. Reefs are not as visible as they should be in regional and global agendas. However, there are moments where coral reefs are building momentum and where we can and must continue to support. Many of you may know that this week at the 7th UN Environmental Assembly, Fiji has led the development of a draft resolution with the support from ICRI to accelerate global action on climate resilience of coral reefs, signalling a willingness to act collectively in the face of escalating risks. And I take the opportunity to thank all of our colleagues currently in Nairobi for your leadership. This political context is also where ICRI's key policy asks for coral reefs are so important. They provide governments with the blueprint for action required to change the trajectory of coral reefs. They call for reducing pressures, strengthening area-based management, embedding coral reefs into NDCs and MBSAPs, designing climate-smart restoration, scale finance, and strengthen monitoring and governance. Above all, they emphasize inclusive, equitable decision-making, ensuring that communities, women, youth, and Indigenous peoples are central to coral reef stewardship. And these policy asks are not abstract ideas, they are practical, they're actionable steps, and they align directly with the priorities identified in this Caribbean report, providing a coherent pathway for governments to follow. And alongside this, efforts from partners across the region, and as we just heard from my colleague Jabba, including the work by the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, continue to demonstrate how targeted investment and improved monitoring and community-led action can reinforce resilience and support long-term reef stewardship. Next slide, please, Lucy. And the GCRMN's work sits at the heart of this renewed momentum. Regional assessments such as the Caribbean Report provide the robust, comparable evidence essential for national planning for climate and biodiversity strategies and for securing finance. They connect local monitoring to regional priorities and global policy processes, and they reveal what action is working, where pressures require urgent intervention, and where resilience exists that should be protected and reinforced. And these regional assessments are also a critical component of the GCRMN's wider goals and directly supports its global assessment. The Status and Trends of Coral Reefs of the World 2025 is being developed from the largest coral reef dataset ever assembled by the network, with more than 21 million observations, 90,000 surveys, and 39,000 sites contributed to by more than 600 experts across more than 100 countries and territories. The report will be released mid to late 2026 and will offer the most comprehensive picture to date of how reefs are changing, where the risks are greatest, and where resilience, importantly, persists. And the voices and evidence from this region, from the Caribbean region, will be central in shaping this global narrative. Next slide, please. So, as I sort of wrap up my remarks, I want to be clear, and I think we all agree with this sentiment, that the situation facing the Caribbean coral reefs is serious. And the trends that we've seen today and that are featured in the report demand urgent action. But the story is not one of resignation, it is one of responsibility and choice. Reefs still have the capacity to survive, to adapt and support the millions of people who depend on them. The examples of recovery that we've seen and heard today are not just footnotes, they're proof of what is possible when science, policy, and communities can work together. And we must not accept the current trajectory. With the strengthened political commitment, sustained investment, and continued collaboration across science, management, and local communities, the Caribbean can be a bright spot of hope amid the adversity facing coral reefs worldwide. And that repeats many of the sentiments that Chris shared with us during his opening remarks. So we must not give up. There is still hope, and we must reverse the trajectories that we see. And on that note, Lucy, I will pass back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom, and thanks for the hope. So before giving you access to the report and before going back to the question and answer session, we just wanted to, as you heard all along the webinar, we had a lot of funders that allowed us to do this great report. So we just wanted to thank and acknowledge their support all along the way to lead to this report. So we have, of course, the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, and you heard Yavanex Batista. That is led by UNCDF, the UNEP, and the UNDP. We counted with the ACP MES program and the UNEP-CEP, who is leading the program. We have been also getting support from the Gulf of Mexico Large Marine Ecosystem Program, the UNEP, the UNOPS, the GEF, NOAA, and SEMARNAT, and also the support of the government of France and the government of Monaco for this webinar. So we really have to thank all of them because these are the institutions that helped us, and without them, this report wouldn't be here today. We also would like to acknowledge the institutions that were coordinating these reports, namely SPORAC, LC Reefs for LC People, the UNAM and the SEMARNAT, as well as ECOSUR and the Coral Reef Alliance. So we needed all this coordination and all these institutions to be here today and to be able to present the report. And I guess most of all, we also want to express our sincere gratitude to all the authors, co-authors, and data contributors of this report. They are all listed in the report, page 38 to page 15, to give you an idea of the amount of people who contributed to this report. Without their dedication and contribution, this report would not have been possible. So we really want to thank all of them. And some of you might be in the room today. So thank to all of you for your support to this report. And we have a couple of minutes to give the floor back to the panelists for the question and answer session. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And please, Melanie, if you want to take the floor.
Okay, thank you. Yes, all the questions came in right when we closed the question and answer session. So it's great. We have time. I'm going to start with two that are kind of big picture, and I will give my take on an answer and then pass it on to the other panel, because I think it would be good if we could have a bit of a discussion and different perspectives. The first one is, are there any key findings that come from the new edition of this report that stand out from the previous version? And so I tend to focus on, the key findings of the decline of hard corals and the increase of fleshy macroalgae is basically the same trend that was seen 10 years ago. So that the key finding is there, but I think part of it is the recognition of the new and escalating threats to the corals. The bleaching, this fourth bleaching event and the heat stress that the corals experienced in 2023-24 was absolutely unprecedented, orders of magnitude worse. And I think that recognition really puts it in the urgency and the link to climate change and the idea that, yes, all of the work we're doing is incredibly important. The last one focused a lot on parrotfish and sustainable fishing and marine protected areas, which are still needed, and some progress was made on that. But the overriding thing, if we don't deal with climate change, that all of these efforts are really going to come untangled. So I'd like to have other perspectives. If one or two of the panelists want to also jump in on this big question to think about really what's different, and this is part of our messaging. Or we can just all continue to think about it and we'll go on. The other one that was the next big difficult question, it's very related. Jenny Mighton asked, how do you see the future of reefs in the Caribbean? And to me, that largely depends on what exactly happens. Are we going to deal with climate change? Are we going to surpass the Paris Accord? That's what we need to do. We need to get lower than 1.2 degrees. And it looks like we're shooting towards 2. So it's all in our control, but it's kind of not in necessarily reef managers' controls. And that's why one of these recommendations, we're really stressing coral reef people, we've got to get out of our boxes and get ourselves into the larger biodiversity frameworks and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I mean, that's where a lot of this is also happening. We've got to kind of elevate the discussion of coral reefs up to that global climate scale. But also, if others on the panel want to give ideas for that big picture question.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, and to link also to the previous question, I think the input from this new report is that we have more recent data in showing the strong impact of the mass bleaching event in 23-24. And linking this to the fact that not enough has been done to go forward and respect this international engagement to reduce the impact of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And so it's not a good result, but it shows that there is still a lot to be done. And that this threat is very serious and it's affecting all the coral reef globally. So yeah, there's still a lot to be done, but there's still time to take some action. And yeah.
Thanks, Leticia. Yes. Does anyone else want to chime in on the big picture? I had one more that I wanted to kind of take a stab at before I pass it on. I know some of the panelists have picked ones that they felt were more directed towards their work. But this one that asked, did the analyses compare status and trends within MPAs versus outside of MPAs? And that is something, you know, we couldn't do on the full Caribbean scale because of getting up-to-date information on the protected areas. So that wasn't something that was part of this remit. It is a really good idea. I think you saw those graphics from the Mesoamerican Reef that looked at the scale, but it was like a huge effort to go in and really look at those zones of the MPAs to be able to tease that apart, the fully protected, highly MPA and not protected. So doing that on the Caribbean scale, I think would be highly informative. And it's something that with more data processing and use, and if we could get even more data coming in from MPAs, that would be a really great solution. So I think, Aldo, you have a question that I think I saw in the chat you were going to answer. Do you want to just,
Yeah,
or did you answer it? Yeah.
I have many questions. I've been answering some of those.
Okay.
So basically, I can summarize. People is concerned about whether or not we included restoration efforts, the
Right.
data sets in restoration efforts to see if the trends of decline that we recorded are getting better due to restoration efforts. And my comment on that is that I believe that we are on track to develop the strategies to have an impact at the scale of degradation. But for now, I must be honest, right now, the rate of degradation clearly exceeds the rate of recovery that we can promote through restoration efforts. That doesn't mean that we are not on track. People need to understand that reporting number of outplants and benefited areas by outplanting and the capacity to produce corals is just part of the game, just one part of this game. The other part is to try to show how those interventions actually translate into improved ecosystem function. That is even more complicated, and we are trying to work on that, not only in the Caribbean, but also globally. The good news is that we are learning faster, we are communicating better, the private sector is getting involved into these restoration efforts. So again, in my opinion, we are on track, but we are still far behind the capacity of recovering what we are losing with the restoration efforts that we are doing. However, the analysis could be an interesting one in the future.
Okay. Thank you, Aldo. That's great. I think there's one here for Jeremy about the analysis. It has this synergy among multiple impacts like warming, acidification, sargassum, overfishing, eutrophication. Has that been included in this analysis in the way the process?
Yeah, so it's always difficult to be able to link a particular threat to a decline in hard coral or macroalgae and so on. It's possible to do it by simply plotting the threats, the trends of the threats and the trend of hard corals. This is some way to do it. But we also use a statistical model, which is a machine learning model, and we include predictors within this model to take into account the impact of these threats. And without more surprise, climate change-related threats are among the top predictors of the decline in our coral cover. So this is also a confirmation from a more mathematical and statistical point of view, which I find very interesting. But in terms of communication, it's always easier to provide both trends in terms of evolution of the threats and evolution of our coral cover and macroalgae cover.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Other panelists, do you have questions that you've picked out during the discussion that you want to answer? I know there was another one that's probably for Jeremy, and I'm not sure if we didn't really get into scenarios, but this is asking about scenario-based projections and how do those exist for the Caribbean and what impacts would be expected over like short versus long-term projections.
Yes, so for ecological systems, it's always very difficult to make projection by the end of the century. People who are working on physics have been working on this for a very long time, and the systems are in some way easier to work with than ecological and biological systems. But we can make projection using the previous trajectories, so we can fairly expect a decline in our coral cover in the next decades if the threats are continue to increase. So I think it's a reasonable hypothesis. And for this, working on climate change would be key, I guess. Once again, we are repeating the same thing, but it's very important to have this in mind.
Okay, thank you. And then there's this one here about the analysis of specific coral species. So they were glad to see some of that in this report. That was new, not previous to the compared to the previous report. But they said, could you talk a bit more about this? And were there any sub-regional differences? Did you look at any differences within the Caribbean and those shifts in the main coral species?
No, we conducted the analysis for the difference in our coral genera at the scale of the region. We were not interested by these trends at the scale of, I would say, subregions or particular areas, because it's also a little bit more complicated. We need to have a lot of data to be able to get a trend. And if we work only on a restricted amount of the data, then getting a trend will be more complicated. You will have more noise in the data, so it's more difficult. But something that have been done also is to use long-term monitoring sites. Sorry, and this is very well documented in the scientific literature, particularly in the Mesoamerican Reef, in Florida, in the United States, Virgin Islands, and so on. So these types of time series at local scales can provide more information than the one we have reported at the regional scale in this report.
Right. And I think that your answer to that question may be similar to this question that was about orbicellas in particular. This person was surprised that because of stony coral tissue loss, that there wasn't a larger dip in the orbicellas. And maybe I know we've talked about this, but maybe you could kind of explain as you think sampling size, or there weren't enough of them to start
Yes,
with.
exactly. So the trend that we reported in the first part of the report are for the entire Caribbean region. And this regional trend can differ from the trends that have been observed at local scales. Because at the regional scale, you will have a combination of very different trends at the local scales. So it's a mosaic of trends that happened in the Caribbean. And then when you combine all the data, you get a different story. And this is the reason why some people may don't really understand why these differences are so important. But the stories are always different between local scale and regional scale.
Thank you. I'm not sure where the question is, but I made a note of it earlier when I was going through about sargassum. Maybe somebody answered it in text when I was talking, but Yeah, someone asked if we have examples of sargassum actually affecting reefs, and we do. So particularly when the reefs are close to shore and that sargassum is rotting on the beaches, the entire water quality, deoxygenation, nutrients, metals, arsenic, it's like it's kind of a perfect storm of problems for corals and reefs, entire reefs with invertebrates, fish, mortality of corals, sponges, all that has been reported. So the sargassum, while, if the reefs are not on the surface, sometimes the sargassum passes over. If you have reefs close to shore, it's definitely a problem. And we've seen that in the Mesoamerican reef. And I think we've had a lot of interest from the private sector in developing businesses that would help address this. And that's one of the things that I think the Global Fund for Coral Reefs and our MAR Positive Invest project we've had a number of these businesses come in and working on new ways of collecting and products that can be made from sargassum. So it's all pretty exciting and new. I don't know, Yaba, do you have a question you want to answer and talk a little bit about some of these financing tools? So.
Sure. Thanks, Melanie, and thanks to all for a really interesting set of questions and overall webinar. Maybe just quickly on the sargassum point, which you pointed out. As Melanie mentioned, GFCR is supporting MARFUN and Healthy Reefs and new ventures in engaging with a company that it's called Carbon Wave. And basically, it's a sargassum biorefinery. They are collecting the sargassum as right now, I think still from the sand, hopefully soon from the water before it reaches the reefs. And they are upcycling it, creating emulsifiers for cosmetics, shampoos, vegetable leather that can actually potentially substitute plastic and so on. So this is how we can, in some ways, how we can turn threats into business opportunities that address degradation, but also provide better livelihoods for people and again a new economy as well. And that's what we are doing, creating a new breed of reef positive businesses, as I mentioned during my presentation. And we are hoping that, particularly in the Caribbean, this model that Carbon Wave is implementing can be expanded. We know that there is a lot of interest in the Dominican Republic and other parts in the Eastern Caribbean as well on the Carbon Wave experience. And Melanie, there was another question from Leona Kustra around whether GFCR is able to expand our model by obtaining funding from the polluters, so cruise ships and others. And that's a really interesting question, Leona. And the answer is we're actually working on that. In fact, one of the key pillars of the new strategic plan of the GFCR is how our experience and that of others like Aura, who is a partner of ours in Colombia, and the Mesoamerican Reef, and other groups that are working in this space of blended finance in marine ecosystems, can help shape global policy and global finance for a truly sustainable and regenerative ocean economy. And one of the initiatives that we are currently in the process of designing, it's called the One Ocean Finance Facility. In fact, today, just about 1 hour ago, we just finished our ministerial roundtable at UNEA on how this facility is shaping up. And the idea is that we want to create, and I don't want to call it a fund, I want to stick with the name facility. We want to create a new facility that is working with governments and private sector actors and creating new proceeds streams that come from ocean-dependent industries. This includes shipping in its wider range, not just cruise ships, but shipping cargo ships as well. We're looking at how we can engage with the subsea cable industry, how we can work with potentially other industries related to tourism to generate these new resources. And why we're betting on this is because, as it was pointed out earlier on, ODA is not enough. It's never going to be enough. And grants also are not enough. We need to include in the system how private sector comes in, but also how we can generate money from private sector sources directly. And the idea is that by generating these new proceeds, we can then support initiatives like, for example, the programs, the GFCR programs that we're currently supporting. We could hopefully extend the life of those programs and increase their sustainability by continuing to finance the work that is being done by Marfund or Fondaction or the colleagues from the Nature Conservancy and others. So the idea is not to reinvent the wheel, is to bring new money for things that are already working and that are creating already a positive effect. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Yaba. That's fantastic. And now that we've got the money almost solved, we're going to do one last question that Andrea is going to answer and back to kind of the nuts and bolts of like some of what can be done. So, Andrea, will you read the exact question? Because I think it's kind of long.
Sure. Thank you, Melanie. So there's a question from Taylor Tucker. What are the main local management strategies that can directly combat climate change for reefs? So one of the management strategies that is really important for us to include in the management plans is water quality. So wastewater treatment plants are really important. There's many different options, such as larger centralized systems, and then there's other smaller scale decentralized systems that are more out of the box and use plants to recycle wastewater. So it's important that we start including these types of systems in the management plans because we need to reduce the outputs of wastewater going directly into the ocean and affecting reefs. And there's some great case studies in the Reef Resilience Network that you can see. Also from Coral Reef Alliance in Honduras and in Roatan. And just to end, I would like to just highlight that in the policy brief, there's more specific management strategies that we can do also to lessen some of these larger stressors. So I invite you to review those. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. I think we're about at time. Lucy, are you going to close and remind people of where to, download?
Yes, exactly. So thank you so much for all your answers and for the questions. This brings us to the end of our webinar. We hope you enjoyed it. And this is where you can find the full report that we invite you to read and to discover more deeply. So you will find on the GCRMN website the full report along with the executive summary that is available in English, Spanish, and French. The policy brief is also available in English, Spanish, and French, and we continue to help us disseminate this report as widely as possible. I just wanted to thank the translator, the logistic team, the report designer, and send a huge thank you to all our speakers for the time, dedication, and support in preparing this webinar, and of course for their invaluable contribution today. Finally, I'm thanking all of you for joining us. It was great to have you on board, and we wish you a wonderful day. Thank you.